Hi there, everybody. How is it going? Hope you're enjoying Global Hack Week security, and welcome to this stream on virtual machines. Really excited to have you all here with us today. I know it's going to be a really fun time, and I hope that you're prepared to learn a lot. Yeah, this is really different than last time I was on the stream on Monday. We had a big crowd and we were playing Tetris. So maybe if we have some extra time at the end of our workshop today, we'll get some time to play Tetris. Who knows? But yeah, that's up to you all. So can anyone in the chat text me or send me a comment letting me know where you're logging on from? So I'll show you a little bit of where I am, just some of the craziness that we're having here on the East Coast. Let me show you. So check this out, everybody. We have some really terrible wildfire smoke here. And you can see that there's just this crazy smoky shroud around New York City right now. And it's actually because of some terrible wildfires that have been happening in Canada. So that's kind of what it's like. Let me share my screen and show you. That's kind of what it's like over here. We're just having some crazy air quality issues. But yeah. Anybody in the chat want to let us know what the weather's like in their region? I'm always really curious to know about that kind of stuff and hear from all of you. Oh, sorry for the ad. But yeah, it's really crazy. Usually we have some fires in the West Coast, but actually this time we're having them on the East Coast of the United States. So yeah, who knows? All right, everyone. So why don't we get started with our slides today? Sorry, I just got totally disconnected there. Okay, Janimar says, wet weather here in Nigeria. We had some heavy rain yesterday. Oh no, I know that sometimes the heavy rain can cause a power outage. So I hope you didn't. I hope your power was okay. But yeah, let me get started. Thank you for sharing. Let me get started with our presentation. So hopefully you all can see that now, and you can see me. Put myself down in the bottom corner there. So yeah, this is a great topic to cover, really, especially during Security Month, because virtual machines can provide a lot of security when you are even in your daily life on the internet. So also, Jonita says normal weather in Uganda. Nice. I love it when here we call sometimes a sun shower. Sun shower when there's rain, but it's also a sunny day. I don't know if anyone else uses that term, but yeah. Anyway, so let me continue on a little bit. I'm Steven, that's my name, and I have been a coach at Major League Hacking for over 5 years, and I've been helping hackers at 50 plus hackathons now over my career here. And I've also been helping on Global Hack Week, which is really a great way for us to engage with the global audience. Let me move my video camera so you all can see the social media there. But yeah, I think this is a really great way for us to all connect together live, kind of in person, but more live from away. But yeah, I already asked this discussion question of where you are logging on from, but this is just to get a sense of how global our community is. That's the reason why I asked that question. So we really do have people logging on from all over the world, and Global Hack Week is a great place to meet some new friends from another place. So definitely take advantage of that opportunity to meet some new people. And you probably share a lot of passions for technology and for coding, maybe, and especially this month, maybe cybersecurity. So it's definitely a great opportunity to engage in all those things. And so now I'm going to overline what our VM workshop is about today. So, first, we're going to discuss what is a VM or virtual machine. So, VM is just a acronym for virtual machine. Then we're going to speak about the advantages of this technology, and we are going to talk about all of the advantages, but especially focus on cybersecurity and why virtual machines can be really good for cybersecurity. Then we're going to test out a virtual machine by actually deploying one on our local computers. So that will be a really good opportunity to learn how to basically make a virtual machine for completely for free using VMware software. There are other softwares available that are free, open source, but we're just going to use VMware for this time. Then after that, we're going to test in the cloud with actually, this should say Cloudways and DigitalOcean. And so we're going to sort of use free credits to get this test up and running. But before we do that, I have another discussion question for all of you. And the discussion question is, who has used a virtual machine before? Leave a chat. So if you've used a virtual machine before, I'd love to hear from you in the chat. Maybe let us know, what did you do with the virtual machine? Were you just playing around trying to figure it out? Did you have a goal in mind? And someone says, I'm currently using a virtual machine. Jennifer says, I'm currently using a virtual machine. That's awesome. Great. So you definitely have some experience with that. And hopefully others in the chat have heard of this technology before, but if not, that's totally okay. And Tanishka Shah says, used one trying to run Linux on Windows. Yeah, definitely. And now Windows actually comes with its own sort of virtual machine. So we could talk about that too. I didn't plan on talking about that, but if folks are interested, we definitely could. But yeah, so virtual machines are pretty common actually in our modern world. And if you've ever logged onto a server remotely, chances are you're actually using a virtual machine because this is a really efficient way to give you your very own space on a larger computer, and is very cost effective as well. So we'll talk more about that later. But really, what a virtual machine is it's a software emulation of a physical computer system. So, there are many layers to a computer system. And one of the lowest layers, actually lower than a program, is actually operating system. So it's kind of like the foundation of our house. You can think of it that way. And so every program that you run on your computer is running on the foundation of your operating system. And so the key is you need some kind of host machine. So what I was talking about earlier is we're going to actually play with two different kinds of host machines: our local machine, and then we're going to play with a cloud machine. So we will run virtual machines on both. And then the next bullet I have here is host OS to guest OS. So my host OS, actually, I'm running on Mac OS. So Mac OS would be my host OS because I'm basically logging on to you all from my Mac computer. But then guest OS can actually be any operating system. So I could choose to have I could choose to install Ubuntu on my virtual machine. I could choose to install Windows on my virtual machine. So Actually, my virtual machine is even lower level than the OS because I can swap out different OSs in that virtual machine. And finally, the third bullet point I have here is hardware abstraction. So this is what I was referring to, where let's say you have one computer system which has its own CPU, and maybe the CPU has 10 cores. Well, you can actually make 10 virtual machines, each one containing one CPU core. And in fact, you don't have 10 different CPUs, but you are abstracting that resource, and from doing so, you can actually get more computers, more virtual computers. So that's kind of the idea with a VM. And before we get any further, I want to make sure that everybody gets set up on Cloudways, which is going to be our cloud provider for this workshop. And I chose Cloudways for this workshop because it is one of the few providers that actually has no requirement for a credit card to get started. So you do not need to put any payment information into Cloudways. All you need is email account. So if you have an email account, you can get a free $100 credit towards Cloudways. So that's a really great benefit of the provider. And so actually, I'm going to ask you to go to Cloudways, and you should be able to get there through DigitalOcean. So I'm going to actually, sorry, I didn't actually put the image in there, but let me show you. So I'm going to share this tab instead, so you all can see. This is what happens when you go to digitalocean.com. So I'm going to put that link inside of the stream. So all you need to do is go to DigitalOcean, just exactly how it's spelled here.com. And when you do that, you should arrive at their homepage. And do you all see this banner on the top of the screen here that says get a better performance for your agency and e-commerce websites with Cloudways managed hosting? Start with $100 free. That's exactly what we want to click on. So when you click on that link at the top of the page, it should bring you to this splash screen, the one that I showed in the slideshow. And so this is where we're going to sign up for the Cloudways service. Make sure you're using this promo code DOcean100. It should already be populated when you click on that banner. But in case it's not, for whatever reason, I just sent you the promo code in the chat so you can use it yourself. And that will give you $100 free credits towards Cloudways, no credit card required. So that's the reason why we are using this platform today. All right. So I'm going to give you all a few seconds to get your information in. You can use your DigitalOcean account if you have one, your LinkedIn, your GitHub, your Google, all of those things you can use for authentication. I'll try to put a little bit of music in the background. Let me know if the music is too loud. Sometimes people tell me that the music gets too loud in the background, and I definitely don't want that. So please let me know if that does happen. All right, everybody. So once you are able to create an account with Cloudways, the next step is that you're going to find yourself picking a server to make. So you're going to want to select the DigitalOcean server, and you're going to want to select the region closest to you. So that's why I selected New York here. You should select whichever server region is closest to you so that you are going to have the best access, the best connection to that server. And you're going to notice that it will create this message to you on the right here called adding server. Your high-speed application will be ready in approximately, and then it will give you a time estimate. The reason why it does that is because it's basically spinning up your application onto that server. And the default application that it spins up is WordPress. So that's why we're gonna try to build WordPress site on this DigitalOcean server. But yeah, so this is another virtual machine, another use of virtual machines, because you can see that the resource here is 2 gigabytes. So it basically has a size of 2 gigabytes, and you can be sure that no resource at DigitalOcean has a size of 2 gigabytes. They're using servers that have hundreds of gigabytes of RAM and, terabytes of storage. So they're only provisioning a small amount of that resource to us for our purposes. And that's what we're seeing in the form of a virtual machine. All right. So that's really good for us to know, because now we're going to move on and actually talk about some of the applications of virtual machines while this server gets spun up. It's going to take a little while. So we're actually going to return to Cloudways later on in the workshop. And that'll be a really good opportunity for us to apply what we've learned. Okay, so let's talk now about the advantages of a VM and why you might want to use one for your projects. So first, I'm going to speak about the cybersecurity advantages of VMs, because that's what our June Security Week is all about. So one of the advantages is isolation. And what that means is that our virtual machines are a barrier that prevents malware and attacks on the VM from affecting the host. So let's say you're using your guest OS and it becomes infected with some malware that tries to attack. So any attacks that occur will be isolated inside of the guest OS layer. Now, the host OS also exists on the same physical computer, but the guest OS is virtualized, and so that's why it is able to be isolated, because first of all, you may even be running a totally different operating system on your virtual machine. So any program that can run on there might not run on your host. And second of all, there's no connections above the OS layer between the two. So they can't access necessarily file system or anything like that. So it's a really good way of isolating because you can control what the guest OS has access to. Second application I'd like to speak to you about is the idea of a sandbox. So this is a really important concept in cybersecurity, because what the idea here is if you have a suspicious file or link that you want to inspect, you should not do that on your personal computer. The reason for that is because anything could be something might be downloaded onto your personal machine, and then it could maybe get some permission to write some information to your machine. So you don't want to allow any of those attacks. So if you are suspicious of any file, but you still have a reason to open it, you could always inspect that from the safety of a virtual machine. And actually, lots of cybersecurity departments will use this, for example, to test a phishing email. So let's say that you get a new email from someone and you're not quite sure if it's real or not. You could test that phishing email using a virtual machine. And even safer is running on a separate machine isolated from the internet, but a VM is nearly just as good. So a lot of the times folks will even totally disconnect a machine from the entire network, and then it's completely isolated. And that way you could test out a phishing email that way. That's the most secure way, but this is another way to look into that. Of course, if you give your personal information, it doesn't matter whether you're using a virtual machine or a physical machine. It's gonna be bad. So you have to still be careful when you're using the sandbox, not to give away personal information. But other than that, it can be a very safe way to explore some potentially malicious file. Another advantage of virtual machines that we'll talk about is patch and configuration testing. So this is actually not as much of a cybersecurity advantage. I should have put this in other advantages. But you can deploy a new project and test it across multiple operating systems. So this is an example of a requirements.yml file. And I want you all to look at this pretty closely. This requirements.yml file originated from a Linux computer. So for that reason, the requirements for this application are all relative to Linux. And so you cannot necessarily use this requirements file if you're going to install the application on Windows. Because if you were to install on Windows, some of these packages are not designed for that operating system. So this is a way that you can test patches, you can test configurations. You could build a project and make sure that it's deployable on Linux, on Mac OS, on Windows, without actually having to buy one computer for each of those. Or install the disks all on your computer, clog up all your space. If you're not going to be using that every day, it's much more convenient to use a virtual machine to test that. So when you're developing your applications, you're pushing a new update to your project, you're testing a new configuration, support for a new operating system. Virtual machine can be really, really helpful for that. And here's another cybersecurity advantage that we have of the virtual machine, which is forensics. So when a system is compromised, you can investigate it without destroying any evidence. So let's imagine that your system got totally attacked and so it's unusable. Well, we can actually save a snapshot of what the computer looked like before it got destroyed and see if we can detect the malware even before there was damage to the computer. And so this is a really great way to investigate and track down exactly what happened, because virtual machines, we can save basically a backup image of the virtual machine to serve as a checkpoint. And so that's a really big advantage, virtual machines over physical machines. Yeah, so definitely worth thinking about as you think about the cybersecurity advantages of this technology. And another cybersecurity advantage of the VM that I'd like to talk about is what we call segmented networks. So we can decrease our system's vulnerability by segmenting or siloing users. And I've just drawn this graph here as an example. So we can create a network connection between two users and denote that using this line here. That would just be an example of the fact that they're able to communicate between each other and give information that way. And we could create another network of, let's say, maybe 4 users here. So if the problem is, if one of these users gets attacked by malware, then that malware can be then sent across these information lines to the other users. So in this case, if someone gets malware on their computer over here, they can send it to this user and this user and this user and infect 3 additional computers. And the reason for that is because all of those computers are connected via a network connection. The advantage of a virtual machine is you don't necessarily have to connect it to other users. So we can build virtual machines which have specific user permissions and specific access to networks. So we can say, I'm actually not going to let this user here see any of these networks because maybe this user has some sensitive information. And these 2 users over here, maybe they have some middle ground where they need to talk to each other, but they also should not be connected. They have no reason to be connected to these 4 users. Maybe these 4 users are in the accounting department, and these 2 users are in the marketing department. There's no reason for them to actually, communicate. So for that reason, they've been segmented off. And maybe this user here has like some very classified information or something like that. Maybe the company secrets are on this computer. So you could silo all of this stuff and not necessarily connect them to the same network. And that's a really big advantage of virtual machine. Another cybersecurity advantage of the virtual machine is training and education. So we can easily create a new image, infect it with some malware purposefully. And then you might ask, why would I want to put malware on something intentionally? Well, the reason is you might want to train someone to detect that, to erase it, to block it from doing some damage. And you don't actually want to have to buy a new computer every time or buy a new operating system every time, reinstall it on the computer, do all this stuff. Maybe you just want to spin up a virtual machine, put the malicious software on there, and then when the exercise is over, you simply delete the virtual machine. Delete it. That's much easier. So for that reason, virtual machines can be really useful for training and education purposes. Another way I can see virtual machines being useful for training and education is if you have maybe limited computer resources. So maybe in the classroom you only have a certain amount of computer resources. Well, you could theoretically spin up virtual machines on those computer resources to serve many students. So when one student logs on, they log onto their virtual machine, they get their access to the resource. When they're done, they delete it, or they turn off the virtual machine and someone else can spin up a different one with a different image. So that could be another educational resource for VM. Another cybersecurity advantage we kind of talked about earlier with forensics, but this is a different application, which is disaster recovery. So how can we get the computer back to a point where there's no damage after an attack? Can we reverse the damage to a degree? And the answer is yes, you can restore a previous image of the virtual machine. So we're going to learn about images very soon in our applications section of this workshop. But I just wanted to highlight this cybersecurity advantage because, it could be really useful and kind of difficult on a physical computer, actually, because the whole thing would maybe get corrupted. But on a virtual machine, you could easily restore to a previous state. So that's a big reason why VMs are so good. So now that we've talked about a lot of the cybersecurity advantages, of course, because it's Security Week, I wanted to move on and tell you about some of the other advantages of virtual machines, because actually they're not all about security. So here's one way that we can use virtual machines. It's called resource optimization. So we can efficiently allocate resources to users who need them the most. And I drew this diagram here so that the largest rectangle represents the server itself, which has a lot of resources. And then I put 4 users in here, which are each using a portion of the server resources. And you can tell that user 1 and user 2, they require a lot of computational resources. Maybe they're doing some they're doing some modeling or some graphics or something like that, where they're using a lot of resources to make big computations and things like that. And then let's say we have user 3 and user 4, they're using way less resources. Maybe that they just type up documents or something like that. Increased document, they're in charge of documentation, let's say, or emails, correspondence. Well, all 4 users, instead of buying them each a computer, we can use a whole server and allow them access to the server through virtual machines. They'll each have their own instance. And actually, the resources of the virtual machine can be divided in this way. And then we can leave a little bit of extra space, maybe for any future application, or if one user needs to take up more resources later. But it's a really efficient system for those purposes. And another advantage of virtual machines that goes beyond cybersecurity is what we call containerization. So this is the idea of running a program on a machine that contains only the bare minimum of what is required to run the code. So let's say that you have a application such as a WordPress blog. So maybe that's a little foreshadowing for what we're going to do later. But what you want to do is run that program on a machine that contains only the bare minimum of what is required. And the reason why you want to do that is because it creates less security vulnerabilities. So if you have to update a package that you don't even use, maybe that package update contains a vulnerability that could be exploited, right? So think about it this way. If you have a house, right, you only need maybe 2 doors in or out of the house, a main door and maybe a side door for any emergency exit. Why would you and let's say that they have one key system? Well, maybe then why would you put in like 6 or 7 more doors that you don't ever use? Maybe those keys, you could lose one of those keys, or the door could get damaged. Or maybe one of the locks is really easy to pick, right? Well, why would you install those doors if you're not going to use them? They only create a possible security issue. So, and the second reason is to save space. So, and resources. So it would cost a lot of money to install all of those doors. And similarly, it would cost a lot of resources to always install so many packages that you never use. And so with containerization, we have a really good way of conserving those resources and also protecting our computer. So now I have a discussion question for all of you in the chat. And the discussion question is, are there any questions or comments about these applications of VM Tech? Just going to give it a minute or two in case anybody has a question or a comment about what we've been discussing here, which are the applications of our computer resources to virtual machines. All right, so feel free to ask any questions at any time, really. And if you were able to get started with a Cloudways account, please let me know. That would be really good for our future of this workshop for the second part. But now I'm going to actually allow for a 10-minute break. So in 10 minutes, I'll see you all back here, and we're going to actually do some real applications of virtual machines, get some spun up ourselves. Oh, someone asks how powerful, sorry, I'll go back to this slide real quick. How powerful should your computer be to run a VM? That's a really good question. So you're going to see that actually you can run a VM on even a local PC like your laptop. It doesn't need to be super powerful. All you need is that the computer is more powerful than the virtual machine that you're trying to create, because you're going to allocate a portion of your resources to those virtual machines. And every operating system has its minimum requirements to run. So let me show you an example from Ubuntu. This is a really common operating system that people use all over the world. So let's see, minimum system requirements. You need, for Ubuntu Desktop Edition, they say that you need a 2 gigahertz dual core processor, 4 gigabytes of RAM, 25 gigabytes of hard drive storage. And all of this stuff is not really pertinent to us. I guess the screen resolution is pertinent to us, but we can create a virtual screen. But so as long as you're able to apportion 2 gigahertz or two cores at 2 gigahertz, 4 gigabytes of RAM, and 25 gigabytes of hard disk, then you can create an Ubuntu virtual machine on your computer. Easy. So definitely not hard for you to run one, even on your personal laptop. It just needs to have the same or larger, basically larger system resources than what's required by the operating system. So I hope that answers your question. And yeah, for other operating systems like Windows, for example, Windows requires a lot more. Let's look at the Windows system requirements. Actually, this is going to be a lot more. So let's see here. Share this instead. So here's the minimum system requirements and your PC. Right. So same thing with the gigahertz. Actually, a slower processor is okay, but look at this: 64 gigabytes of storage instead of 25. So the reason is Windows 11 is a much larger operating system, and if you want to install it, then you're going to need a larger storage. They have some other requirements here. So, you know, a lot of this stuff is going to be handled for you by whatever virtual machine software you're using. Yeah, but that's a good question. So then Jonita says, can the host OS and guest OS be the same, or do they have to be different? And the answer to that is that the host OS and the guest OS can be completely different. So I'm actually going to show you an example when we get back from our break. It's going to be, I'm using my Mac OS, and I'm using that as the host. And so then the guest OS I'm going to be using is Ubuntu. So I'm actually just paste that in the chat. So this is the example we're going to use when we get back from break. We're actually going to take Mac OS as host OS and have Ubuntu as guest OS. And you can do this on any combination that you might have at home. And so one more thing about this Windows 11 thing is that if you want to install Windows as your virtual machine, you're going to need a Windows key. And so Windows is not a free operating system. You need to purchase a key for access. So yeah, I'm not going to be demonstrating on Windows 11. I'm going to be demonstrating on Ubuntu because Ubuntu is actually free for anyone to download. And so, yeah, we're gonna focus on Ubuntu for today. But for now, we're going to move on It's really great that you all have some good questions about virtual machines, and it's great to see that. But we're going to actually move on to our break, so I can go get some water, and you all can maybe think about some other ideas you'd have with virtual machines, and then we're going to move on to doing this in real world with a local and a cloud deployment. So I'll see you all in just 10 minutes. All right, everybody. Hi, how are you? Good to see you back from our break. I hope you had a good break. I was able to get a little bit of water, which is excellent. All right, well, hopefully you are ready to begin the second portion of our workshop, which is we're going to call demos. So the first one we're going to do is a local demo when we're going to use the program VMware Fusion. And VMware Fusion is free to use for personal use. You can pay for the commercial license, but we will not be paying for the commercial license for this workshop because it's for educational purposes. So if you see anything that asks you to pay, please do not do that. So I'll walk you through how to get the personally used license. But before I do that, I wanted to tell you a little bit about what is VMware Fusion. So VMware Fusion is a free open source project, and it enables you to run operating systems virtually on your host OS. And so you're going to install the version of VMware Fusion that is particular to your host OS, in my case, Mac OS. And it'll allow you to install many different kinds of operating systems. So that is the purpose of this program. So let's download. And so I'm going to give you a few seconds to download from their website. Let me copy this link and I will paste it into the chat so that you all can access it. All right, so once you get to this website, you're going to want to scroll all the way down to the bottom, and you're going to want to click on the Fusion 13 Pro. So I'm going to type that into here, or, and then your OS. It probably won't say, well, it could say the same as mine if you have Mac OS, but if you have another machine, then it will probably say your machine's operating system there. And so you want to click on that left hand link, download now. All right. So now that you've had a moment to download that, it should be downloading onto your computer. I'm going to move on to the next slide. And in this circumstance, we're going to download the ISO for your for Ubuntu. So if you want to try to download a different ISO, you're welcome to. But let me actually do a little bit of a explanation of ISO. So ISO is basically an image, an operating system image. And so it will be structured according to basically whatever operating system you and whatever configuration you put on there. So the ISO that you're downloading from Ubuntu is the sort of vanilla beginner template, blank slate Ubuntu version. And so you can go to ubuntu.com/download/desktop. And if you go there, which I will do, you want to download Ubuntu Desktop. There's also Ubuntu Server. We won't be using that today. And you can download this version 22, which is the latest long-term support version. So there's basically a long-term support there. You could also download the latest version, but that will not have as much long-term support. So I recommend downloading Ubuntu 22. And you can see that there's a jellyfish here because it's Jelly. That's the name of the operating system version. And so it'll download. It takes a really long time to download, actually. we probably should have done this workshop. We probably should have downloaded the image first. It'll probably take about 15 minutes to download. So we'll wait a few minutes, and if anyone is able to download Ubuntu Desktop, please go for it. Maybe you can just take up some time. If anyone wants to play with me, we can play some Chrome Dino while it's downloading. I'm really bad at this. I don't know if you all have Chrome Dino, but let me know what your high score is on Chrome Dino. This dinosaur is always jumping over cactuses. Let me know if there are cactuses where you live. Oh, that's right. You're supposed to duck under those. All right. Well, hopefully Ubuntu has downloaded. Maybe we'll play one more game so that Ubuntu can be downloaded for all of you. Does anyone think I can beat my last high score? Who knows? If you have a high score in Chrome Dino, chat it. Let us know. Maybe we can play a tournament after we're done with our virtual machines. Yeah, no, you just got to jump over those. Oh well. Anyway, yeah, I didn't know you would have to jump over the pterodactyls. That's kind of surprising. But hopefully you've had some time to download. And if you need the silicon chip version, because you have a silicon, you can download that here. You want to click on the ARM architecture. So most computers are actually with AMD architecture, but some of the newer Mac computers are with ARM architecture. So you can download that version through the other website there. Yeah, I'll send the other one as well, both links. Maybe we'll just move on for now, so everyone can get theirs installed. But so once you have VMware Fusion downloaded, you want to follow these instructions. So VMware Fusion, open it up, and you should see it, and then click File, and then click New. So this is going to create a new virtual machine on your computer. Then the next step is to select the installation method. So you want to click on Install from Disk or Image. So you're going to drag your ISO file here to start installing. And in this case, we're going to use the ISO file that we downloaded from Ubuntu. Okay, so I actually have this one here. I downloaded both AMD version and ARM version, just so you can see what they should each look like. You're going to want to click on whichever one matches your computer's architecture, which is probably AMD 64, actually. So you would click on that. And then once you click on the on the ISO image, you want to click Continue. And it will tell you the configuration of the virtual machine is now complete. So you can see the summary of your virtual machine. It tells you what is the guest OS. And in this case, for me, it is Ubuntu 64-bit ARM 22.04.2. So that's telling me that this is the new OS that I have on my VM. Then for new hard disk, tells me it has a 20 gigabyte hard disk, which meets the requirements for Ubuntu. Then memory, 4 gigabytes. Networking, it's going to share with my Mac, so actually it is connected to the network. And then there's a device summary, And so it says it has 2 CPU cores, which is the minimum requirement once again. And so you could change these requirements. You could change these settings by clicking on customize settings. If you want to alter the resources that are available to this virtual machine, or you want to disconnect it from the network, and you want to test some phishing suspicious information, that's totally fine. But we're just going to click on the blue finish button. And then the next one, it says, what would you like to save this image, this machine on? And so we're just saving it to this folder called virtual machines, or we're going to put this ISO, we're going to put this virtual machine there. So we just click save. And after you do all that, it should spin right up. So please let me know if you're able to see the final product. And I'll go back actually through those steps because I realized I wasn't sharing my screen. So you click File New for VMware Fusion, then Install from Disk or Image. Then you will click on the ARM processor there, or AMD if your architecture is AMD. Click Continue, and click Finish after the virtual machine summary, and then click Save. And then you should be able to see your image. And I'm actually going to show you what this looks like live. So let me present that for you. So this is my VM Fusion, VMware Fusion application, and here's my virtual machine. So I can double click on this, and I'll show you what it looks like now, in case you are unable to follow along. Let me know, by the way, in the chat if you had success spinning this up. But yeah, it's been spun up. So when you first do this, you might have to click on try or install Ubuntu, and you just hit the enter or the return key, and that should get you right to this page here. So yeah, then once you're in here, we have an Office type program. We could type something. We could say, "Hello, GHW Security Week." That's great. I mean, and just remember, I'm actually our StreamYard is actually running from my Mac, so this is totally different machine. And we can actually go to the Firefox web browser, and we can go to mlh.io and visit that Major League Hacking website, all from this virtual machine that's running off of my computer. So it's a really neat resource, and I hope that you were able to get it working on your machine. Let me know if you had any issues getting this virtual machine running. But hopefully you did not have any issues. And I'll show you another feature of this, which is that it has its own file system. So you can see documents here. It's actually empty. So you can put your own documents, downloads, pictures in here. It's actually really useful for anyone who wants just a second image on their computer. If you don't really like using your current operating system for some things, you could just switch to a new machine and start with a blank slate. So that's one of the main reasons why this is such a great product. And so now, are there any questions about this local demo that we were able to do for our virtual machines? Okay, well, someone says if they don't have a Mac OS, what can they use? If you have Windows, it should actually work the same. You can also install VMware Fusion on Windows. So let me show you how to get there. Oh, I'm sorry. I don't mean Fusion. What I mean is VirtualBox. Sorry about that. This is the other alternative that you can use. Let me send that over. That's a very good question. So if you're using Ubuntu, let me show you another way that you can get yours working. So this is called VirtualBox. VirtualBox is for AMD 64 architecture. So this will actually work on your Linux computer that you have. So you can download VirtualBox at this link here, VirtualBox 7.0. And I'm going to download, I'll download the developer preview. And I'll show you what VirtualBox looks like. All right. And of course, it's going to look different for you because you have a Linux computer. But let me show you how VirtualBox would work. I'll send you the link, by the way, to VirtualBox. So definitely click on that link there. And so now when you click on Oracle VM VirtualBox, you should be able to walk yourself through the instructions. And I'll show you, I actually have VirtualBox installed on my computer as well. This won't work for me because I don't have the same architecture as you. But here it is, so let me share my screen. So you should see something that looks like this if you're using VirtualBox. And so you want to click on the New button here. And let me show you what pops up when you get that New button. It will show you Create Virtual Machine Name. So you have the name here. We can call it, let me share my screen. You can call it the Ubuntu VM test. Let's just call it that for the purposes of this virtual machine. And then we can select an ISO image. So here's the two images that I was referring to earlier. For this computer, we would install with ARM, you would install with AMD. And so I'm going to actually install this manually by clicking Skip Unintended Installation. You could try using the attended installation if you want. I'm going to put 2 CPU processors here because I think that actually that's the requirement of the operating system. And I'm going to move this up to 4,000 megabytes so that we meet the minimum requirements of the operating system. And maybe I'll create just slightly larger disk. Yeah, hopefully we should now have our Ubuntu test. And let me show you what I now see for VirtualBox, and you should see this too. Mine says beta build warning. Yours should not say that though. But when I click start, it should start my virtual machine. All right, so yeah, see if you can get that to work on your personal computer. Let me show you on mine. 1 second. All right, so hopefully you can see that there. So we can click Enter to try or install Ubuntu. And this might not work on mine because, like I said, this one is designed more for Windows and Linux than Mac due to the AMD architecture. But hopefully on your computer, it would have more luck. All right, so that's just a tip for all of you who are using Ubuntu or Windows or some other operating system. VirtualBox is another really good option. I'm just going to power off this virtual machine. Okay, so let's go back to our presentation because now we're going to look at the other demo which I have prepared for all of you. Anyone has any questions, by the way, about this technology, please let me know. I'd love to help you troubleshoot and get your virtual machine running on your own. But yeah, so now we're going to move on to the cloud demo, and this should work really for everybody. And it's DigitalOcean, but also Cloudways. Those are the two technologies that we're using for this cloud demo. So really, this should work no matter what, as long as you have an internet connection, which of course you have if you're watching this live. So let's go ahead and try that. So hopefully you already went through the startup of Cloudways, and because we did that in the beginning. And so hopefully you have this account created by now. And this is what it'll look like on your dashboard. If you see on the left, it says your server, and then it says adding server. And so hopefully your server is added by now. It really should be. And so then these are the master credentials on your server when you click on it. So you should see that you're allocated 2 gigabytes memory, 50 gigabytes disk, your IP address, your New York server, or whichever location you chose. And then it has its own IP and username and password for the master credentials. So this is how we could theoretically open up this server. And just so all of you know, the server is now, well, it will be very shortly closed. So don't waste any time trying to get into this this server. But that would be a big one. So if you want to click on this IP, it'll tell you that it's unsafe. But that's just because this does not have any certificate. So if you click on the advanced and then you click proceed to the IP address, you're going to actually be able to get in. So the way you get to this is by clicking on launch SSH terminal, which I guess I forgot to mention, but you click on launch SSH terminal, and then click on advanced and click on proceed to your IP address. And then it will come up with your terminal. And so you can log in by using the username and password from your credentials. And then you actually have a virtual machine here. So this is a Linux operating system that you are running from the cloud from a server which is existing in New York or wherever your server is, the one that you accessed. So this is a really great opportunity to expand your computer resources by potentially going into the cloud. And let me give you an example application of Cloudways, which they provide, which is WordPress. So if you switch from servers, you click on this toggle button, you go to applications, you should be able to see your application here. And that's going to be a WordPress server. So if you were able to click into that, I actually have the link up here for mine that you can check out yourself if you want. I'll paste it into the chat. You can get a server going. and then actually get a WordPress server spun up. So when we click on this link, it brings us to a real WordPress site. So you can see that, right? Everything is working as it should. And if you want to log in to the site, you can also do that. So let me show you how to do that. So the admin panel is a resource from Cloudways, and you can just click on the URL that's there, and that will bring you to the login page for this one. And so that is a good way to log in. You can use the username and the password from your Cloudways account, and you can edit the articles on your WordPress site. So let's do that together, actually. Get my login set up. It'll only take a second. So remember, you go to Applications, click on Your Applications, and then go to Admin Panel. And log in using your credentials. All right, so now I'm going to share this tab instead so that I can show you that we were able to access the credentials for WordPress. And now if you want to make a post, let's try and make a post. My first post. This is a test post. Publish. All right, so now if we click View Post, there it is, actually available online. And your computer is not at risk whatsoever, because this entire WordPress server is run off a virtual machine, meaning that all the resources are isolated from the host OS, and actually it's on the cloud, so it's isolated from you too. All right, so now that we're done with this, I want to go back to our original sort of title slide, and we're going to summarize what we did today. So on the VM workshop summary, first, what is a virtual machine? And we answered that one. It's a software emulation of a physical computer. All right. And then the second thing we talked about was, what are the advantages of this technology? And we talked about resource sharing and containerization as some of the advantages, patching, configuration testing. But then we also spoke about the cybersecurity perspective, which was through things like isolation, network segmentation, and many more. And then third, we talked about testing locally with VMware. And the way that we did that was by deploying an Ubuntu ISO image to our host OS. And you can do that with VMware Fusion. You can also do that with VirtualBox if you want to use it on a Linux or a Windows computer. And fourth, we tested in the cloud with Cloudways, and we launched a WordPress blog on our own. So that was a really great way to get some experience with cloud and virtual machines in the cloud. Right? So at this time, I'd like to turn it over to all of you, and see if you have any questions. If you have any comments, definitely let us know. And I want to maybe also just give me a second. I'm going to grab the check-in form so that all of you can remember to check in, because I actually forgot to send that to you at the beginning of the workshop. So yeah, virtual machines are pretty cool. I hope this has persuaded you to try them out. And here's the check-in link for today. So hopefully you found this workshop interesting or helpful in some way. All right, everybody, and let me let you know what the next workshop is. So actually, it's coming up right after this with John, and so it's going to be called Reverse Engineering with Hardware, Part 1. So here's the check-in link for the next workshop, and I'm sure it's going to be really fun. And it's coming up in just under 30 minutes, just under 30 minutes. So I hope you enjoy that. And thank you for joining for the Virtual Machines Workshop. We're signing off now, but take care.